The bar was always crowded on a Thursday night. It wasn't the kind of place where anything extraordinary happened. It was, in fact, the opposite, a regular watering hole for people too tired to care about anything except the comfortable numbness of alcohol. But tonight, something felt different. Alexander Wilde couldn't put his finger on it, but the air felt thicker, as if the world itself was holding its breath. He'd been coming to the same place for years. The flickering neon lights of the top shelf sign outside, the worn leather stools, the hum of the jukebox, and the faint scent of stale beer and whiskey, they had all become part of the soundtrack of his life. A regular at best, invisible at worst. Just another face in the crowd, but tonight, Alexander felt more than just the buzz of the drinks or the quiet murmur of conversation. Tonight, he felt a hum beneath it all, a vibration that seemed to course through the floorboards, up through his legs, and into his chest. He had been experiencing these strange sensations more and more lately, ever since it all started, a few months ago, during a stressful meeting at work. At first, he chalked it up to fatigue, or stress, or maybe even just the late-night hours. But that was before he realized what it really was, sensing things. Not emotions, he'd always been able to pick up on that, but something deeper. Something beyond human understanding. Now, as he sipped his whiskey, letting the warmth spread through his veins, the sensation was there again. He looked over at the woman sitting 2 stools down, laughing with her friend. She had the kind of laugh that sounded genuine, but Alexander could feel it, the lie beneath it. The tremor in her chest, too slight for anyone else to notice, gave it away. "No, I didn't skip my last meeting," she said, but the words came with a subtle vibration in the air. It was like a small disturbance, a flicker, a blip in the reality of her words. He could sense it in her pulse, the faint tremor of deception. It was an addiction now, this need to know, to feel the truth beneath the surface. He couldn't ignore it. And somehow, he didn't want to. Alexander took another sip of his drink and looked away, trying to focus on the warmth of the whiskey in his throat rather than the constant hum of the world around him. The voices, the clinking of glasses, the distant thrum of the bass from the jukebox, all of it had become part of the frequency he could tune into. The world, once so simple and tangible, now felt layered, as if reality itself was built on a foundation of delicate vibrations. It had started small. At first, it was just a heightened awareness of people's emotions. He could sense when someone was nervous, when they were lying, when they were filled with anxiety or joy. It was useful, at first, because it allowed him to navigate social situations with ease. He could avoid awkward conversations, steer people away from uncomfortable topics. It was like a superpower, but one that didn't feel so much like a gift as it did a curse. Then it grew. It began with the realization that his sensitivity to emotions wasn't just about people. He could feel things in the world around him, the way the air shifted when the weather was about to change, the slight tremor in the pavement as a subway car passed deep underground. At first, he thought it was just his mind playing tricks on him. But no, it was real. He could feel the vibrations in the fabric of reality. His awareness of the world's frequency continued to intensify, until it reached a point where even the smallest movements felt amplified. He could sense the faintest wave of energy, the hum of machines, the pulsing beat of the city itself. He was becoming hyper-aware, sensitive to the smallest of things, the kind of things no one else could feel or even imagine. It had its upsides. His work as a financial analyst was easier. He could read people's moods, understand their desires, their fears, with precision. It made him a star at his job, though he never truly enjoyed it. The thrill of understanding people, of truly seeing into their souls, was far more interesting to him than any balance sheet or stock forecast. But the downside? The isolation. The more he tuned into these energies, the more disconnected he became from the people around him. He could no longer stand the trivial conversations at work, the mindless chatter at parties, or even the mundane complaints of his friends. They were all so small compared to what he was experiencing. And then there was Sophie. His ex-girlfriend. The woman who had been a central part of his life for years. The relationship ended not because of a lack of love, but because Alexander had become a stranger in his own skin. He had no patience left for anything that didn't align with his new perception of reality. The way Sophie smiled, the way she spoke, it all felt off. Like a badly written script that didn't quite fit the actors, Alexander knew it was his fault. He knew the distance had come because he had begun to see beyond her words. The truth behind her mask had become too visible. And when he could see that, when he could feel the unspoken currents of her emotions, it was like trying to hold onto a fragile object that was slipping through his fingers. "Alex," Sophie had said when they broke up, her voice quivering with that familiar mix of frustration and sadness. "You're not you anymore." That was when it all started to fall apart. The lies, the subtle distortions, the cracks in his perception of reality, they were starting to unravel his life. He didn't care about work, or money, or the things he used to care about. He cared only about understanding the forces of the universe, understanding what lay behind the veil of human perception. The more he understood, the less he could connect with the world he used to know. Tonight, in this bar, with the woman 2 stools down still lying to her friend, Alexander could feel the universe vibrating around him. It wasn't just the people or the lies that he could sense now, it was something far deeper, far more cosmic. The air felt heavy with a hum, a vibration that seemed to echo from some distant corner of the universe. It was as if the fabric of reality itself was speaking to him, pulling him towards something greater than himself. And he didn't know if it was a blessing or a curse that he stood up suddenly, the vibrations of the bar's conversations swirling in his chest like a tempest. He needed to get out. To think. To escape the constant pull of the world around him. The door swung open as Alexander stepped outside into the cool night air. The city was alive with the rhythm of life, cars honking, pedestrians walking, distant sirens wailing. But as he walked down the street, the hum of the world grew louder in his ears. The city's energy pulsed like a heartbeat. He could hear it, he could feel it, as though he were in tune with the very soul of New York itself. It was intoxicating, but it was also terrifying that he stopped at the corner, waiting for the light to change. And then, it happened. He felt it, a shift, an undeniable shift in the atmosphere. It was as if something else was out there, something beyond human comprehension. It wasn't just the people or the world around him, it was the entire fabric of existence itself. The universe was whispering to him, and he could hear its voice, but what was it saying? Alexander stood at the corner, staring at the light as it flickered red. The cold air clung to his skin, but it did little to clear the fog of confusion swirling in his mind. The world felt different now, more fragile, as if something was pulling at the edges of reality, threatening to unravel everything. He looked around at the passing cars, the people shuffling by, their lives so mundane, so ordinary. But beneath it all, there was a hum. A pulse. It was more than the noise of the city, it was the heartbeat of the world, and he could hear it. It wasn't the kind of thing you could explain to anyone, even if they were willing to listen. The energy, the vibrations, the whispers from the fabric of the universe, it was all just a little too much for one person to hold. He had felt it before, but tonight it was stronger, like the signal was clear, and it was drawing him toward something. He crossed the street, his pace quickening as the realization began to hit him. This wasn't just a heightened sense of perception anymore. It was something more. Something far deeper. He could feel the city, yes, but now he could feel the pulse of everything. The subtle energy in the trees swaying in the distance, the soft rhythm of the subway tunnel beneath the streets, even the barely perceptible tremors of the earth itself, he could sense it all. He turned a corner, heading toward the quieter side of the city where the buildings weren't so close together, where the streets were a little less crowded. His breath came in short, sharp bursts as he tried to calm himself, but the truth was, he was afraid. He didn't know what was happening to him, but it felt like he was on the edge of something huge. The sensations were growing stronger, the hum growing louder, pulling at the edges of his mind. His head throbbed. It wasn't pain, exactly. It was like the feeling you get when you hear a song you can't quite remember, a melody that loops in your mind and won't leave, but it's wrong, a distortion of something that should be familiar. He stopped in his tracks. The sky above him was shifting. Not visibly, but felt. It wasn't just the atmosphere. It was as if the space itself was warping. The vibrations were radiating outward, bending the space around him. The buildings no longer looked solid. The ground felt as though it was subtly pulsing, a soft ripple running through it like the slow movement of the ocean. He wanted to scream, to tear his mind away from this new reality, but he couldn't. It was there, all around him, and he had no choice but to listen. To feel. His fingers twitched, and for a brief moment, he could sense the microenergy fluctuations of the light bulbs above him, the subtle hum of the cables running beneath the streets. The complexity of it all was overwhelming, and yet, it was beautiful. A grand symphony of energy, sound, and light that no one else could hear. But it was as if the universe had just opened up its doors to him, and he was being pulled in. What is happening to me? The question buzzed through his mind like the hum of the air itself. He wanted to call someone. To talk to Sophie, maybe. She would listen. She always listened. But then he remembered. Sophie wouldn't understand. She hadn't understood when he told her about the first flashes of perception. How could she possibly understand this? How could anyone? No. This wasn't something he could explain, but it was real. And it was growing stronger. He was becoming more than human, and the cost was becoming apparent. He could feel it now, the disconnect. The pull away from everything he had once known. He could no longer exist in the world the way others did. It was as if his mind was stretching, expanding outward, away from the narrow boundaries of human experience. The more he touched the universe's energies, the further he was pulled from the physical world. The more disconnected he became from his own body, from the simple pleasures and pains of living. What had once been simple, holding Sophie's hand, the taste of a good meal, the warmth of the sun on his skin, had become alien. He gripped his temples, trying to force himself back to some semblance of normality, but it wasn't enough. He felt like he was drifting, floating, as if the space around him was slipping through his fingers. Everything he had once believed to be solid, real, his life, his job, his friends, was blurring. He could feel it now, his own mind was starting to break apart. But I can't stop, he thought desperately. I need to know more. Something deeper, something ancient, called to him. The deeper he dove into the currents of perception, the further away he drifted from everything he used to be. His past felt like a distant memory, like a half-formed dream that didn't quite make sense anymore. He was losing himself, and yet, he couldn't help but be fascinated by the pull. The idea of discovering what lay beyond the ordinary, beyond the borders of what human minds were designed to comprehend, was too much of a temptation to resist. He wasn't sure how long he had been standing there, in the middle of the street, his mind swirling. Time had become meaningless, and the physical world had lost its weight. But suddenly, he heard it, something in the air. A shift. A sound, or perhaps just the sensation of it, a faint whisper. He looked up. The stars. The stars weren't just lights in the sky. They weren't just distant suns. He could feel them now. They pulsed, faintly but undeniably. Like distant beacons, calling to him, urging him to understand. His breath caught in his chest as the realization hit him. He wasn't just perceiving the world around him. He was perceiving the very fabric of the universe itself. The tiny shifts, the vibrations, the patterns of energy that made up everything in existence. The walls, the sky, the stars, they were all connected in a web of energy, a web that no one else could see, but he could feel it now. And it was as if he were standing on the edge of something vast and infinite. He stumbled back, his head spinning. The light around him flickered, distorted. He was losing it. But then something strange happened. His vision sharpened, and for a brief, terrifying moment, the air around him seemed to split. The familiar world of New York, the street, the buildings, the people, it all fragmented, like a broken mirror, splintering into 1,000 pieces. And in the gaps between the pieces, Alexander saw something else. Something beyond. The new dimension. The one he had sensed but never truly understood until now that it was vast. It stretched out in every direction, an infinite expanse of energy, patterns, and light. A place where the rules of human perception no longer applied. He could see it all, he could feel it, his knees buckled, and he collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. The world around him crashed back into place, the fragments of the universe snapping back into their proper alignment. But Alexander could still feel it. The threads. The vibrations. They were still there, just beneath the surface, waiting for him to dive back in, and then, a voice. Soft at first, but clear. Not in his ears, but deep within his mind. "You are becoming something else, Alexander." His heart hammered in his chest as the voice continued. "The question is, will you accept it?" Alexander's mind reeled. The universe, his perception of everything, had just shifted in ways he couldn't even begin to understand. The pull of it, the allure of this new dimension, was overwhelming. He felt himself being pulled, deeper and deeper, into the unknown, but there was a cost. The price was clear now. He could feel it with every fiber of his being. The more he embraced this new perception, the further he drifted from humanity. The further he drifted from everything he had known. It was the only choice left. Either he stepped into this new reality, leaving behind the world he had once known, or he turned back. But turning back seemed impossible. The universe was calling to him, pulling him into the depths of something he couldn't escape, and so, with his heart racing, Alexander made his decision. Alexander's body felt weightless, as though the ground had vanished beneath his feet. His heartbeat thudded in his chest, reverberating through his entire being, a stark reminder that he was still anchored to the world in a way that his mind was beginning to outgrow. The voice that echoed in his mind was still there, soft yet undeniable, like the murmur of a breeze passing through an open window. "You are becoming something else, Alexander." It whispered once more, and this time, he didn't flinch. There was no fear, no hesitation. Only a deep, aching pull toward whatever waited beyond the veil. His body trembled, not from cold, but from the intensity of the experience. Every nerve in his body hummed in resonance with the cosmic frequencies that surrounded him, the universe stretching out before him like an infinite canvas. The stars above, he could see them now as something more than distant, faint lights in the night sky. They were alive with energy, pulsing with a rhythm that resonated in his chest. And it wasn't just the stars. It was everything. The air around him, the distant hum of the city, the vibrations of the earth beneath his feet, it was all part of the same thing. A web, an intricate dance of energy, threads of light that stretched far beyond the scope of human comprehension. He could see them now, could feel them intertwining, becoming one with the vastness of everything. He had always thought that the universe was an unknowable thing, an immense mystery that no human could ever understand. But now, standing on the cusp of something unimaginable, he realized how wrong he had been. The universe was not a riddle to be solved. It was a symphony to be felt, a song played on a scale far beyond the confines of human senses. And Alexander could hear it now, every note, every chord, every beat of existence. But even as the beauty of it all threatened to swallow him whole, the price of his newfound awareness gnawed at him. His thoughts began to slip, like fingers losing their grip on the last vestiges of something familiar. He could feel it happening, his mind was fracturing. The deeper he went, the harder it was to distinguish the echoes of his old self from the chaotic brilliance of what he was becoming. The world he had known, the world of conversation, of simple pleasures, of human connection, seemed like a distant memory, something that no longer belonged to him. He closed his eyes, fighting to hold on to something, anything, that still resembled the life he had once lived. But it was like trying to hold on to the wind. The more he tried, the further it slipped away. The sensation was intoxicating, exhilarating even, but it was also terrifying. He had crossed into a space where words no longer held meaning. Where the rigid structures of human cognition no longer applied. But what else could he do? he couldn't turn back. The choice had already been made. The moment he stepped into this new perception, he had left his old life behind. The life that Sophie had once shared with him, the job he had worked tirelessly at, the friends who had once been his anchor, they were all fading now, evaporating into the ether like smoke in the wind. There was no going back to that. Do you understand now? The voice asked him, not with malice, but with an almost serene curiosity. The world is far bigger than you ever imagined. But there is a cost to seeing it all. And you must decide, Alexander, whether you can accept the price. His breath caught in his throat. The price. He had thought he understood it, thought he could handle it. But now, with the enormity of what he was perceiving pressing against the edges of his mind, he realized how naive he had been. The price was not just his connection to the world, it was his very identity, his humanity. The further he stretched beyond the limits of human perception, the more he lost himself. And the more he lost, the more he became something else. Something alien. His knees buckled, and he fell to the ground, the cool concrete beneath him grounding him in the physical world for just a moment. He took a deep breath, feeling the vibrations of the earth beneath his palms. The sensation was grounding, but fleeting. The world was slipping away from him, unraveling at the seams, and all he could do was ride the wave. But even as he fought to hold on to what was left of his humanity, he realized that there was no point in resisting. The universe was calling to him, pulling him toward an understanding that could never be reconciled with the limits of human perception. He had crossed the threshold, and there was no turning back. And so, for the first time since this strange journey had begun, he accepted it. He let go. I accept, he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was speaking to the universe, or to himself. The world around him shifted again, a brief moment of vertigo as the space around him seemed to warp and distort. The hum of the city faded, replaced by the deeper, more profound vibration of something else entirely. The sound was like the hum of a distant star, the pulse of the universe itself, a rhythm that spoke to the very core of his being. His vision blurred again, but this time, instead of crumbling back into the familiar world, it expanded. His mind, his perception, his very sense of self, all of it expanded outward, folding into the fabric of the cosmos itself. He felt it, the pull of the universe, urging him forward, pulling him deeper into its infinite expanse. He could see everything now. Every thread of energy. Every pulse of existence. It was all there, woven together into an intricate tapestry that stretched out in every direction. The stars, the planets, the very air he breathed, everything was connected in a vast web of energy, a web that was both infinite and fragile. And Alexander, for the first time, truly understood it. He saw how it all fit together, how the energy flowed and intertwined, a delicate balance of forces too complex for any human mind to fully grasp. But he could feel it. He could experience it. The city below him was just a distant memory now, a small speck in the vastness of the cosmos. He was no longer bound by the limitations of time and space. He had become part of something far greater, something that existed beyond the confines of human perception. He was no longer Alexander Wilde, the man who had once been trapped in the mundane world of numbers and emotions. He had transcended that. He had become something more, a part of the universe itself, woven into the fabric of existence. The voice came again, this time without the whispering question. It was a statement, clear and certain: you are free now, Alexander. You are one with the universe. And for the first time, Alexander understood what that meant. He was free. Free from the constraints of his past, free from the limitations of human perception, free from the ties that once bound him to a world that was too small to contain him. He closed his eyes, letting the cosmic rhythm wash over him. The last remnants of his humanity, his old life, faded away. There was no fear. No regret. Only the infinite expanse of the universe, and the deep, eternal hum of existence. He was part of it now. And for the first time in what felt like forever, he was at peace.